We all know the struggle to hire is real. Once you find a great candidate, you want them to get to work quickly, and your candidate wants to work too. But a slow background check process can be a major barrier. Not with Checker. Checker puts modern technology in your hands, helping you hire great new people with background checks that are fast, simple, and safe. Learn more at checker.com. That's CHECKR.com.
Welcome to the AI+HI Project. I'm Nichol Bradford, SHRM's Executive in Residence for AI+HI. Thanks for joining us. For this episode, we're discussing how HR teams can leverage AI to help revolutionize their organization's documentation practices, as effective documentation is an essential yet often underestimated skill of successful leaders and organizations. Joining us is Hollie Stuart, founder and CEO of FutureGen HR Solutions, which specializes in empowering HR teams to harness AI for tackling these challenges. Hollie, welcome to the AI+HI Project.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. It's great to be here.
I was really interested in this conversation because I think people really underestimate the power of documentation. And it's one of those things that, if it's not working, you don't notice it probably until you're having an issue. I think it's a little bit
Right.
like, having a water seepage in a house. Like you don't notice it. But once you notice it, it's a real problem. So I'd love to start with the basics. What are the kinds of interactions, activities, or incidents would you say are important for managers to document? So for our audience who might not know this.
Well, so many people, when they think of documentation, they think, okay, I need to have a written warning. I need to have corrective action of some sort. But it's often the early interventions that get overlooked. Often I speak to managers who say, oh, yes, I had a coaching conversation with this employee and it went well. I thought the matter was taken care of, so I didn't document it. Well, not always, but often what happens is that the issue repeats itself a few weeks later. And then all of a sudden, they want to make another move. They want to escalate the corrective action. And when I speak to them as our HR advisor, I ask them, what documentation do you have from the initial conversation? And they said, ooh, we didn't document it because I thought it was taken care of. It was just a casual conversation. And so then they have to start out with square one. So I recommend that even informal coachings get documented, any sort of feedback. And of course, that can be used as support on so many things. It's not just when it comes down to lawsuits, because that's something that's kind of elusive to a lot of managers. They're like, yeah, when are we going to be involved in a lawsuit? More often than they perhaps think. But where it really helps them is if the pattern does repeat, and then it also makes their lives easier come review time when they need to recap that year with that employee, and they can show the employee was coached and they corrected or improved whatever needed to be improved. Or if it didn't improve, then they're able to speak to those specific instances and dates. So to recap, coaching conversations, feedback conversations, of course, in addition to written warnings and corrective action, I think is very beneficial to document.
And with that, why is it critical for HR teams to train their managers? It sounds like, as you mentioned, people don't necessarily think these things need to be done. And so it seems like training is important. So could you share with our audience why it's critical to train managers on how to do it effectively? And then also the cost of poor documentation?
Yeah, absolutely. But so often we hear HR advisors say, yes, it's important to document. If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. Now, most managers are familiar with that phrase. The issue is that often HR managers don't train managers, operations managers, and people managers on how to document. And then the people in the people management side aren't trained by their managers because they weren't ever trained. And so it comes down to who is going to do this training. HR has all these specializations. You have L&D, you have comp and benefits, you have employee relations, you have leaves of absences, but no one actually owns that process of training documentation. And so it could be very well they need to reach out to a firm such as mine or have somebody internally train them on the processes. Because often what I see when a manager attempts to document a conversation, they'll include things like, oh, this employee was disrespectful. This employee has a bad attitude. And I ask, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? Hearing an employee is disrespectful or has a bad attitude or isn't doing well doesn't tell me what's actually happening and what needs to be improved. So it's a matter of training them on specificity, clarity, what needs to be included, not including character traits like this person is being lazy. I've seen that in documentation. And having specific dates and incidents, including where the gaps in performance were, what the next steps are, what's going to need to be improved. And then, of course, how is the manager going to support that person? Usually 90% of those details are included, and the documentation doesn't serve what it needs.
Holly, what I'm hearing is that many people, they think of documentation as just something to do with challenges, but what you're describing is that really effective documentation that is specific and non-general about personality traits, but really specific with those 3 points that you described for guiding and coaching employees, as well as the documentation you need in case something goes wrong. That level of specificity is the thing that needs to be trained in. And I like that it's both, you're describing not just a way to avoid challenges, but a way to be very solutions oriented.
Yes, yes, because that's the way it has to be presented to managers. They may think of it as drudgery, which admittedly, for most people, documentation is not a fun thing to do. But what we need to be able to explain as HR professionals is how it benefits them. And I hear managers say every year, come annual review time, like, I don't know what to write about this employee. But if they have all those coaching notes, it becomes very easy. They have the specific details, they have the dates. And again, it's not showing where the employee, quote, messed up. It's showing where they improved. Maybe they were just coached once on something, and something that the manager can speak to on a review is, I coached this person one time. They took the feedback very well and improved 100%. So it helps them, and it has a clear record of how the employee performed over the year.
What you described is a great use case for AI. So if you could share, like, why is AI becoming such an important tool for helping managers with documentation?
Well, I think a lot of times as HR professionals, we don't ask why documentation doesn't happen in the first place or why it's so general. And so I actually spoke to several managers I worked with in the past, and I asked them, what are some of the main challenges to completing documentation? And of course, we hear, no, it takes so much time, and I'm just so busy, and it's hard to get to it. But then as I probe deeper into it, um, there were some more specific issues that a lot of managers aren't willing to admit. And finally, a couple said, Holly, I'm not confident with my writing skills. I don't really know grammar or punctuation that well. I had kind of a hit and miss education, or I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong. So then I just keep it very general, or I don't want this employee not to like me. And I thought, aha, what if we could use AI and create a prompt that it has a guidance and has guardrails? So we're not just asking AI, oh, clean up and organize this documentation. We're asking AI to review it. And so I created a prompt with 9 different criteria, and it asked things like, Is my language neutral? Are my details specific? Are next steps included? Is manager support included? Was the employee's perspective included? And that way, when the person plugs it in, AI will review it and say, okay, you had X, Y, and Z. Now we need these details as well. And then AI automatically organizes the thoughts and it corrects the grammar and punctuation. So somebody could hypothetically just put in a brain dump that's not organized. AI will organize it within seconds. And it may need to go through a couple of rounds where AI says, okay, correct this. And then the manager runs it through again. And then when it gets to the final finish, of course, it requires human review. We don't want AI to be a substitute. We want it to be a tool that it saves the manager so much time and it takes away those fears that they'll do it wrong. They won't put enough, that their grammar and punctuation will be incorrect. And it's so much quicker.
I would also manage that, I would also imagine that people who use the voice elements on ChatGPT, actually, most of my prompting or a lot of my work with I use the voice section. And so you really just could make sure that you are, you really could just talk to it to
Yes.
answer those prompts and then get the kind of documentation that you need. So basically, AI is making it easier and easier and easier for managers to effectively document.
Absolutely. And the thing is, managers are on the go all the time. So to your point, they can use the voice function of ChatGPT, which they can get on their phone as an app, and they can speak to it while it's fresh in their mind. Because the other thing that happens as well is that managers will have this long, exhausting conversation sometimes with an employee, and they're like, I don't want to have to like completely go through it again and try to remember all the details. And of course, we recommend as HR professionals document as soon as possible. I always say within 24 hours of the latest while everything is fresh in your mind. Yes, I mean, after the conversation, it's all fresh. They could include that prompt and speak to ChatGPT of all the details. You can even have several extraneous things that ultimately aren't needed. That it's better to start out with too much than too little. And ChatGPT or whatever platform somebody wants to use can organize it. And the only thing I caution strongly against, if we're using an open source platform like ChatGPT, is do not include names of employees, the name of the company, any identifying characteristics. I said, okay, not to harp on Mickey Mouse, but if you need to use a name like Mickey Mouse or some cartoon villain you don't like, use that instead.
Well, that goes to my next question is that we know how, we've talked about how HR teams can need to do their own documentation. But, you mentioned managers. And so HR teams also have to help managers learn how to do their documentation because the HR team is not always in the room. And
Right.
so how do HR teams train managers to use AI for completeness, clarity, professionalism, et cetera?
Well, first of all, we would have to figure out who's going to own that process. Is it going to be somebody on the HR team, perhaps somebody from employee relations or someone from the L&D team, leadership and development, or do we hire an outside company to come in and train it? First of all, who's going to own that process? And then number two, one of the hurdles to overcome is we still do not have so many people using AI at all. And they're afraid of what they don't know. And their greatest fear is, oh, if we use AI as a team, then it's going to result in job loss and less
Right.
job security. And they don't see it as something that's making their job easier. They can accomplish more in less time. I equate it with a calculator, for instance. Yes, we did crunch all the numbers manually, But why would we do that when we have a calculator?
Right. Well, so we have a great deal of research, and our SHRM research shows that organizations that prioritize AI upskilling and reskilling, they see that 55% of their workers use AI daily, compared to just 27% in organizations that do not. And so, how can HR teams best integrate training for AI enhanced documentation into the managerial workflows?
It's showing them how it's going to work for them. So I recommend starting out with a pilot group of maybe 5 managers and choosing the AI platform they want to use. It could be ChatGPT, it could be Copilot or Microsoft, and choose something that's high impact, but not necessarily really high stakes just yet. So we can say, okay, we're going to pilot using AI for coaching conversations. At that point, they're fairly informal. Or we're going to use it to help document one-on-one conversations. And the key is they start out small. They take some initial steps. And when they see how it can make their everyday jobs easier, when they see how it can benefit them, then they can move on to bigger things like, okay, can it help me draft this corrective action? Can it help me draft this performance improvement plan? So, in recap, I think it's to pilot it with a few managers and show them how it will work for them.
Yeah, our research shows that 77% of US workers say that it helps them accomplish more, and about 73% say that it improves their work quality. But that's if they use it, and they don't use it without the training. And also, what I'm hearing from you is, for this very important yet underestimated area of documentation, both for, you know, proactive, and positive reinforcement, as well as to be prepared, for anything that might happen. It's training managers specifically on, um, on documentation, and then how to use AI with documentation to make it, easier, and also better, because it can help you with the right prompt be more specific, so that the documentation is actually good documentation versus something that actually won't help you in the end.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to mention as well, and you asked this earlier, what's at stake? Again, I said managers can think of a discrimination claim or a lawsuit as something really elusive that won't happen to them. That in a SHRM article I looked up, it said that discrimination costs companies approximately 64 million per year. And that is from three different things. One, they said it's because managers aren't familiar with anti-discrimination laws. Number two is there's a lack of direct face-to-face conversations. So, in other words, people aren't having real-time conversations like on video or in person. Maybe they're doing a texting or Teams chatting. The
Mm.
third thing is lack of documentation. That's what can make or break a discrimination claim. And the way I put it to managers, because I was a manager myself, a people manager for 18 years before I ever went into HR 10 years ago. So I know what it's like to be in their shoes. And I told them, you don't want to be involved in a lawsuit. It's not fun. So people say HR is looking out for the company. No, I'm looking out for the managers. I'm looking out for the employees. I'm looking out for everybody.
So one of the things that we've seen a big rise in, and this isn't research, it's just sort of my personal experience. Every single call I'm on now has an otter or a recorder of some kind in it. And so, how did that factor into in how does that factor into documentation? Because there's like so much more. There's so many more transcripts of what's happened. Or, one of the things I see people doing is, and I actually do this myself too. It's like every time I sit down, even in an in-person meeting, if we don't have a recorder, I ask if we can author it, so that there's notes. And I have to be honest, if someone doesn't want to author it, then I offer them the role of taking the notes for the meeting and sending the follow-ups to
Yeah.
everyone. So there's just a lot more documentation that's out there, or not a lot more, not formal documentation, but documentation of what has happened. How are you seeing that factor in?
And in companies that I've worked with, I haven't seen quite as many use those transcript tools. Some of them do. And that's something that can certainly help. If we do want to download the transcript and distill it down to the main points. Again, we would have to be very careful because a transcript is going to have people specific names more than likely. So we would have to do a scrub of it before we would put it through an AI tool to make sure it doesn't have any identifying characteristics. And yes, I mean, we could ask AI to distill it down to the main points.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, I mean, a lot of companies now have their, many more companies do not have a corporate infrastructure, like their own private AIs, or, instances of, whichever company they're contracted with, then do. So, everyone who's at mid-cap companies and smaller companies, or who they just haven't done it yet, they for sure have to use Mickey Mouse. But for companies that have their own instance, then it doesn't really matter there, right? Because it's still private information.
Oh, the companies that have their own licensed AI tool.
Yeah.
Now, the last company that I worked at, we had our own licensed version of Microsoft Copilot, and we could include company confidential information in that only because it was dedicated to the company. And they actually had a policy that said, do not use ChatGPT, use our version of Microsoft Copilot. So it would depend on the parameters that the company sets up. Maybe with the company licensed version, they still don't want confidential details. The last one I worked with said, you can still have them in there.
So looking ahead, how do you see AI transforming the way that HR teams are going to approach documentation? So, like 5 years from now, what's it like? And what are the skills that will be essential for HR leaders to be able to thrive in this AI environment?
I think what we can see eventually is having AI incorporated into HRIS systems or systems that HR teams regularly use. Right now, we are using these open source platforms because they're free and they're available. I think it can potentially be an upgrade in the software and HRIS systems where it's included. And you know, we can use a similar type of prompt or have the same guardrails and parameters to say, okay, let's run this documentation um, through a cleanse, so to speak, to make sure that it is legally sound and clear and neutral and is fair to everybody. And what was the second part of your question?
Well, just the skills for that, for an HR person to thrive in that environment.
The skills would be to be open to the technology, of course, and then to be able to help transfer those, especially to people managers, and show them the benefits of it. And again, there's still a lot of fear with HI. I work with clients every week, and I'll ask the frontline employees who uses AI, or even some of the frontline supervisors are like, oh, no, we don't want to use it. We're afraid it's going to take away our job somehow. So a lot of it is breaking through those fear barriers to show them this isn't going to jeopardize people's jobs. It's going to make it easier where you can get to more complex tasks and work on those. So I think it takes HR being a champion for AI too.
Well, HR is certainly in the room and in the middle of these AI transformations. So our last question for our guest is, for an HR leader who, in our audience, who, learns of this conversation, what do they do on Monday? What is the next thing that they do in order to improve their organization's documentation practices with AI? Like, what do they go and do on Monday?
I recommend that person, go to the person that they report to in HR and talk about setting up a training program and a pilot program with a group of managers, because that's going to help HR as well, where they're not reacting and asking, oh, what documentation do you have? And they're like, oh, we don't have any. Or they do have the documentation and we're thinking, oh, we can't use this, or no, this isn't complete. So I would recommend initially talking to somebody who would have the influence to say, let's test this out.
So basically, really find an ally and get started.
Yes.
And that's it for this week's episode. A big thank you to Hollie for sharing her experiences and insights with us. Thanks for joining the conversation, and we'll catch you next time.
Did you know our podcast is only one part of the AI+HI Project? We also host an annual event featuring visionaries from the worlds of business, tech, and HR. Plus, we publish a weekly newsletter that includes topical articles and the latest research from SHRM, all to help you stay ahead of the trends. To sign up, just make your way to shrm.org/AIHI. And you can also follow SHRM on social media for even more clips and stories. Like, share, and tell us how you're innovating towards a brighter future.
Are slow background checks blocking your ability to hire faster? With Checker's modern technology, you get background checks that are faster, easier, and safer. Ready to go hire? Get started with Checker at checker.com. CHECKR.com.
SHRM.